Good morning and good afternoon, wherever your location may be. My name is Jeff Shazinski, and I'm with the National Center for Approach Technology, or NCAT. And we are assisting in today's webinar a virtual tour of Organic Farm Conservation Activity Planning with Harriet Behar, an organic specialist with the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, also affectionately known as MOSES. And she is also a Certified Organic Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS Technical Service Provider, or TSP. A lot of acronyms. Harriet will present an example of developing a conservation activity plan for a transitioning organic farm, drawing on her experience from her efforts in Wisconsin. The webinar is intended to help the attendees better understand the details of becoming a TSP for NRCS, working specifically with organic production systems. NCAT and MOSES are part of a 3-year National Conservation Innovation Project where 11 organizations have joined with the NRCS to better integrate sustainable and organic agriculture production systems into NRCS programs and procedures. This webinar is the third in a four-part series on this topic. The 2 previous webinars can be found under the list of webinars at our ATRA website at www.atra.ncat.org. The final webinar in the series will be presented Thursday, March 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and will be on the topic of how NRCS TSPs can support biodiversity conservation in organic systems. As we proceed, we encourage you to type in your questions that is available on your screen, and we will have a Q&A session after the presentation where we hope to answer as many of the questions as possible and as time allows. You can also email the presenter today, as well as contact NCAT at our 1-800 hotline at the ATRA project at 1-800-346-9140, or if a Spanish speaker at 1-800-411-3222. If you didn't get those numbers, we'll have them posted later in the webinar. Also, at the end of the webinar, there will be a very short evaluation. Please help us make these webinars better in the future by providing your feedback. It shouldn't take too long. The 11 organizations who are joining with NRCS and NCAT in this effort are the Center for Rural Affairs, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, the Organic Farming Research Foundation, the Virginia Association for Biological Farming, the Florida Organic Growers, the Kansas Rural Center, the Wild Farm Alliance, Land Stewardship Project, and Practical Farmers of Iowa. Today's presenter, again, will be Harriet Behar with MOSES. Harriet has been an organic specialist with MOSES for over 16 years, specializing in topics related to organic inspection and production. She has also been farming organically for over 30 years and is currently farming in Gay Mills, Wisconsin. Finally, joining us today to assist in answering questions will be Lindsay Haynes, who is our organic liaison with the Ecological Services Division of NRCS based in Washington, D.C. So let's begin, Harriet.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar. So I'm going to talk about writing a transition to organic conservation plan, otherwise known as the CAP 138, for the NRCS. We have had previous webinars, as Jeff talked about how to become a technical service provider to specifically write this plan and receive payment through the farmer from the NRCS to do this. And so I let you go back to the ATRA NCAT website and look at those archives. Next slide. So this is going to be a virtual walkover tour of a farm. This will help you understand the work that you would be doing as an NRCS approved TSP while writing the CAP 138, or the Transition to Organic Plan. This plan will have a variety of alternatives that you will present to the farmer, and then the final plan will be what they decide they want to do in the coming years to address the conservation concerns that you have identified during your walkover. Next slide. So first, just to make sure you know what you need to do, on the NRCS Tech Reg website, there is a criteria listing for what goes into that CAP 138. Next slide. There's a nice checklist, and here's the web link for that. And of course, this will be archived, so you can get that later. You don't have to write it down now. But this just helps you make sure that you are covering all the items that the NRCS needs to see in the plan in order for it to be considered complete. It also helps you during your walkover that you are covering the issues that you need to discuss with the farmer during the time that you are there on the farm. Next slide. I also suggest that you familiarize yourself with the National Planning Procedures Handbook. This is an excellent document which really helps you understand how to frame those discussions with the farmer. Each farmer has their own economic challenges, social challenges. They have various goals, capabilities, and challenges, as well as opportunities on their farms. And this Planning Procedures Handbook really helps you frame that discussion and cover the various items. And also, too, just as a technical service provider, you are there giving advice, and you're not really there to make a judgment on what the farmer is currently doing. If you see erosion on the farm, rather than berating the farmer, you're there to offer suggestions for improvement. And most farmers, I would say all farmers, really want to do the right thing, but don't have the technical tools and background that you bring as a technical service provider to the farm. So they are actually already open, if they've applied for this plan, to hearing what you have to say. But you need to be presenting it in a way that is helpful rather than judgmental. And in the end, the farmer must agree with the suggestions that you make. So since we're going to be visiting a dairy, there's also another document from the NRCS, this Pasture Condition Score Sheet, which helps you evaluate the pasture that you're looking at. And so this is another good document to have along with you. It's a little one-pager that you can work with the farmer to help you evaluate whether this pasture is going to be sufficient, especially since this is such an important issue for someone who's transitioning a dairy to organic. Next slide. Another item is the web soil survey. You will need to have a map of the farm, so you'll need to go to this website. Next slide. So you'll get the address, and you can download the map directly from Web Soil Survey and walk around with the farmer. With that map, you have an understanding of how the fields lay. And, of course, when we look at this farm, we see that it's right bordering a river. And you can see that the buildings are quite close to the river, which we will go over when we look at it during our virtual walkover. Next slide. Next slide. It's coming. I know it's coming. Okay, so Web Soil Survey can also link on that map all the different soil types on that farm, which you will have to also submit to the NRCS. This is basically the map that you will submit to them. But this is also something that perhaps the farmer may not know, all the various soil types and the challenges and opportunities that these present to them during their farming operation. So this is another good thing that you can do either before you go to the farm, or definitely you have to do afterwards. It's also necessary to have these soil types when you are completing the required Russell II soil erosion calculation evaluation, which has to be submitted with your plan as well. Next slide. So this is what the Russell II evaluation tool looks like. There'll be a printout that you can have, which I did not include in here, which will have the various soil loss evaluation and equations. depending on, if you look at this, the bottom part of the slide, there's various choices the farmer can make in management, what type of tillage tools they're going to use, if they're going to include cover cropping, if they're going to leave residue, and of course this will also include the slope and the soil, which helps calculate what the erosion potential is for various management activities as well as soil and climatic conditions. Another thing that Russell 2 can do for you as well is you can talk with the farmer about the crop yield potentials that are present inside Russell 2 as well as within wet soil survey. So this is a very useful information that you'll be bringing to this farmer when you are working with them in the development of this plan. Next slide. Another thing that you need to make sure you are familiar with is the practice standards that are available in the state that you're working in. Every NRCS state office has its own website, and you can go into the electronic fields, I don't know, the FOTG, F-O-T-G. I will fail on knowing what all the acronyms mean, but this is where you go to find the practice standards and the job sheets that will help you see exactly what is approved for use in the state, what the producer can do, and what specific management activities they can do, let's say, for instance, under cover crop. Next slide. And this is an example of a cover crop from Wisconsin practice standard where it discusses the purpose, the criteria, and the activities. And so be familiar with these practice standards, and you may end up going home and reading them again to see if that practice standard is something that would be useful to the farmer after you've done this walkover and had this discussion with the farmer during the 3 or 4 hours that you will be with them on the farm. Next slide. So organic really does have many conservation benefits, and part of the organic regulation is that the organic farmer must maintain or improve the natural resources of the operation. And that includes the physical, hydrological, and biological features, including soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. Now, there is a difference between the organic system plan, which is what the farmer submits to an organic certification agency, and this Conservation Activity Plan 138, and a full-blown conservation plan. So there's basically 3 things that the farmer could choose to do when they are transitioning to organic. This Conservation Activity Plan is very narrowly focused in helping them understand their conservation concerns and specifically tie them to what they need to do in order to achieve organic certification. A full conservation plan, which is something that the producer could also apply to NRCS to have funded, is much more of a holistic view of everything on the farm. Let's say that they are only looking to certify their cropland and not their livestock. There might be some things associated with the livestock that would be reviewed during a larger conservation plan rather than just this CAP 138. Next slide. So the NRCS has some handy templates to help you write your plan, so then again you are prompted to complete all the items that you need to submit in order to have that plan approved. The NRCS does give the farmer the money for this. You have a contract with the farmer when you're writing the plan, and then the farmer receives the money from the NRCS, and then the farmer pays you. And so really it's up to you how much you charge for the plan. We have discussion about that in a previous webinar about TSP and how to deal with those payments. So there's one for cropland, next slide, and there's one for grazing. So on this farm, you would be completing both of these templates. Next slide. Another item is this Resource Considerations Field Inventory Checklist. This is another handy one-pager that takes you through soil, water, air, plants, and animals. And I know the NRCS likes to call that SWAPA. If you add energy, it's SWAPA. But this is another nice little checklist to have with you so you can check off what that you are following and looking at all the various concerns that would be present on the farm. Now, technically, this needs to be submitted with the plan, but the NRCS district conservationist, that would be the person in the various counties, would be the one who would submit and sign off on this. But you can complete this checklist on site and then pass that on to the NRCS district person and have a conversation with them concerning what you saw on the farm. But they will be the one who will actually be submitting it to the NRCS in the end. Next slide. Lastly, you should have a copy of the organic regulations with you when you are doing that farm walkover. The farmer is really looking to you to provide the information they need to make sure that they can achieve organic certification. And so if there's specific questions, you can show them those standards. You can leave them a copy of those if you want, just to help them. And they really, in my experience, this is really what they're looking at, is they really want to know, please help me understand these regulations. I want to be certified organic. I want to make sure if I go through the certification process that I will be successful. And if you want a copy of the regulations, here's the website. Next slide. Okay, now you've taken care of all your paperwork, so you arrive at the farm. One of the first things to do is really try to build rapport with the operator. Draw them out, have them speak about their goals, what are their needs and concerns, what are their future plans, what are they seeking to do in this transition to organic. In many ways, this is a big decision for them in how they are changing their current system and wanting to become organic. And it can be a little scary. So they're really looking to you to help them understand what they need to do to make this journey to organic more successful. Next slide. So as you're walking around, and like I said before, this is going to take you 3 to 4 hours during this first farm walkover, and you might have to do 1 or 2 more, as well as numerous phone calls. You look and you see that he's already got a temporary fence between him and the neighbor, and that yellow arrow is pointing to the permanent fence between him and the conventional potato fields on the other side. Mike states that he's got a lot of wind and dust that comes over the fence from that field, and he has already put in kind of a temporary fence, but there is a conservation concern here. And if you looked at the previous soil mapping, you will have seen that he's got a lot of sandy loam here. So that is something that, when it is open ground, can cause a significant amount of wind-blown erosion from the neighbor onto his organic land, which could be a concern for both conservation and organic. Next slide. The potato field also has center point irrigation, and he says that he thinks that they put in some kind of inputs into that water, and at times that water also comes onto his organic land. Next slide. So you start walking and looking closer at that pasture, and he states that he doesn't think that he can meet that 30% dry matter intake from pasture during the grazing season, which is required under organic certification for ruminants. Next slide. So using that pasture condition score sheet, that one page that I talked about earlier, you can go over the density of the growth, the quality and diversity of the forage, and really work that out with the farmer, see what their goals are, what do they want to see, and help them to do this evaluation even without you present. The more you can teach them, the better farmer they can be. You can see, too, that Mike has done some reseeding with some limited success, and so you'd be talking about soil types, seeds, and types of grasses and forages that are better suited to his climate and soil type. Next slide. Also, Mike has stated that he uses the flat fields near the barn for his grazing to make it easier for his cows to get there and back. And then he grows corn and soybeans in a continual row crop rotation on a somewhat sloping field. Now, this would be an issue. Oh, you can go back, please. This could be in soil erosion as well as inorganic because you cannot do a continual row crop. So this is something that both under the organic system plan and in his conservation activities, he's going to need to change in order to accomplish that transition to organic. Next slide. Mike also has a sacrificial area, pasture area for use for feeding hay. Not that that is an issue, but the fact that he needs to feed hay during the growing season and the grazing season is an issue for his organic certification. Next slide. Another item, as you're walking around, he says that his heifers are not housed and they're just fed hay year-round and they never get to graze. And again, this would be an issue under the organic certification, as well as, you know, a conservation concern, depending. Right now, this all looks quite well bedded, but at times you can talk to him about what does it look like at the end of winter? What does it look like in the early spring if you get a heavy rain? And of course, we do see some kind of bare ground there in the background. Next slide. So he has set up what he considers a rotational grazing season where he moves his dairy cattle every 30 days from paddock to paddock. That is not really considered intensive grazing, and you can see that that would probably not be the best way to use his pastures as far as giving the grasses enough time to recover and grow back to have a more of a lush forage for his animals. Another thing is Mike stated that it hadn't rained for 3 weeks before you had gotten there, and yet there's this kind of wet spot that's from a leaky pipe. But this bare area around the watering tank and his animal walkway could be something, too, that NRCS could help him because I would think that when there are periods of rain, this would become quite a muddy mess. Next slide. So we look, and here the calves are housed in hutches, and Mike says that they are moved around the farm. So you can see you're looking at everything, the crops, all ages of livestock, and we will get to the housing. So next slide. Here's some other calves that are housed quite close to the river. He says that he moves them around, and at times he's got them over here. And this could be an issue, considering how close the manure would be. You get a heavy rain, where is that manure going to go? Well, it's going to go downhill right to the river. Next slide. Dairy cows are fed supplemental hay even during the grazing season, and so this is another issue for his organic certification that will be discussed. Next slide. In addition, there's a lane leading up to the barn, which we talked about, but that is kind of bare dirt. And you notice there is a barn cleaner there coming out of the barn, and Mike states that he spreads that manure year-round because he really doesn't have any way to store it. Next slide. He might stockpile it for a week or two near the barn, but that's about it. If he can get out in the field, even in the winter, he will spread that manure. Next slide. So you can see this is the inside of this Tysol barn where the cows are milked, and they can come inside during inclement weather. But basically, it is most of the time the animals are outdoors. Next slide. Walking barn, you see the milk house, and you notice it's on the side of the barn closer to the river. And if you remember from the aerial photograph, that the buildings are quite close to the river. And then you kind of notice something. You come a little closer. Next slide. That there is kind of this pipe sticking out of the milk house is actually leaking some oil from the compressor onto the ground and it's right below where a significant amount of water would drain off the milk house roof. Knowing, again, that this is sandy soil and you've got this river right nearby, so the water table is quite high, and it's sandy soil and there's oil here, this is obviously a concern for groundwater. Next slide. All right, so you keep walking, and again, like I said, this is going to be a 3 to 4 hour experience. You're walking all over the farm, and then you start talking, and Mike tells you that where that yellow arrow is, there's actually an old Sand Point shallow well that's no longer used but has not been abandoned. So this is another issue. And just to say, you see all these people in the picture, that's because this farm was one where I did a training where I learned how to be a TSP, and I do have permission from the farmer to use these slides, but I also kind of modified some of the activities and added a few things in. But most of this is one farm that is a real-life situation. Next slide. So Mike's daughter has hogs in this barn for her 4-H project, and they don't currently go outdoors at all. And he wanted to know if that's acceptable under organic production, if she wanted to do it the following year when he had organic grain and crops that the hogs could eat, if he could still maintain them inside the building. And those of you who know organic regulations know that would not be allowed. Next slide. So you walk around the barn, and you see that there's very limited area outside for those hogs to go, especially since the river is so close. Next slide. And periodically, they do pile the bedding outside the barn, and it gets spread again, year-round. Next slide. So here again is the river. The barn is directly behind you. You can see there's quite a bit of close proximity for areas where there would be manure right to that river. Next slide. So as you walk down to the river, you can see, though, that even though at times the cattle do graze up to the riverbank, that area has not been overgrazed, at least it doesn't look like it, and there's good grass cover. So this is an area where he has done, has paid attention to the natural resources of his farm. And Mike did state that he really enjoyed the river, that he and his kids, he grew up on this farm. He remembers they swim in the river, they fish in the river, they canoe and rowboat on the river, and so they do really care about maintaining it for the wildlife and for their own pleasure, and so they don't want to pollute it. But again, they're looking to you for suggestions on how to enhance and protect this resource. Next slide. Now he does have a stream on the farm where the cattle can go in and get water, but not all of his paddocks have this access. So they're not there all the time, and you can also see too that basically it hasn't been terrifically overgrazed, but at times the cattle are in the water. Next slide. And so here we are. We're still walking around the farm. Behind the barn, Mike takes you over to an irrigation pond that his father built in the 1960s, and it is just choked with algae. This is a sign of high phosphorus, and you can even see at times the cattle might try to go down there. I don't know if they would really want to drink out of that, but it would not be a good idea. But you can see, too, that because of that bare area, that the pond is kind of slide. So the previous slide was taken in the fall, and then this slide was taken the following spring, because I had been back to the farm twice. Where the arrow on the right-hand side of the slide is where the river is, so it's basically just kind of a levee holding that pond in place. and the left-hand arrow is wire, because at times he still does use the water from that pond to irrigate his spring pastures. So this is a significant issue. Mike stated that he would like to clean up this pond, maybe stock it with some fish, but he knows there's a lot of work to be done to bring it to a healthy state. He didn't really want to get rid of it, but he could see that if it ever he said that it never went over as far as it then draining into the river, but there is that chance and risk. So that's another issue to be discussing. Next slide. And lastly, we did see a lot of waterfowl during that farm tour. Next slide. So as you're walking around, you're taking notes and really discussing the goals. Like Mike said, he wanted to have that pond for possibly stock it with fish and have it be a little bit more friendly to wildlife than it currently is. So you're maybe going to go inside, sit at the kitchen table, and go over the various concerns that you saw, both for the NRCS, where the NRCS might be able to help with some of these conservation concerns, as well as for the organic certification. Next slide. So we're going to go over those concerns again. So first you see, remember, there was this issue with wind and water coming over the fence from the neighboring conventional potato field. Another question would possibly you could ask would be, is there aerial spraying of the potatoes next door? Because that is something that could occur. But one suggestion you could have for the farmer would be a shelter belt or windbreak of trees in what would be considered the buffer zone that's required for organic. And again, the NRCS doesn't pay for everything. The farmer really needs to make that commitment, because they're going to have to keep them watered, they're going to have to keep them, they're going to have to plant them and maintain them. And so when you're discussing anything with the farmer, this needs to be a collaborative effort and really see what the farmer is willing to do, because the final plan should not have anything in it that the farmer doesn't want to do. Next slide. So here's an example of the practice standard for windbreak and shelter belt, and this would be something that you could then perhaps send to the farmer later. So when you suggest this would be an option, you can send this to them, perhaps highlight certain areas where you feel meets some of the concerns that they have on their farm, and have that discussion. You can even send along the job sheet if there's something in that specifically that would be useful for the farmer to know. Next slide. So Mike also stated, remember, that he didn't think he could meet the National Organic Program requirements of 30% dry matter intake from pasture during the grazing season. And so there are some NRCS practice standards that could be put in place that might help him. The forage and biomass planting, Code 512, the prescribed grazing, because right now he's basically has just like 4 paddocks, and he could probably get a lot better use of his grazing land, as well as do it in a more environmentally beneficial way if he was doing a little bit more intensive grazing. And so this prescribed grazing practice standard would help him with that. Next slide. Another conservation concern is him growing the continual row crop on that sloping field. Of course, not only is there a conservation concern, but this would be an area where you would absolutely be doing your Russell II evaluations and talking over with the farmer the various alternatives in their management strategies. Perhaps they would want to put in strip crops and have alternating between a row crop and a permanent forage or a small grain. Obviously, for organic, they're going to have some forage and small grains in the rotation because the continual row crop is not a soil building rotation. What is required under the organic regulation. Next slide. So conservation crop rotation, number 328, which helps the farmer kind of move from a continual row crop to including legume or a small grain in the rotation, adding cover crops. Perhaps maybe he's taking off some of that corn as silage, and he can come in afterwards and put in rye for the winter, so there is a cover. Strip cropping, like I said, and really working that Russell II calculation in the management section and working through the various options and then showing the farmer which ones give him the best protection against soil loss is the kind of collaboration that you'll be having with the farmer during your development of this CAP 138. So you might be calling the farmer on the phone, discussing certain things, sending them some information in the mail, and then discussing it with them on the phone. So this is not just a one-shot deal. This is basically working with the farmer for anywhere from 2 to 4, 6 months on developing what their conservation activity plan will be. And you will need to do these Russell II calculations on all the fields, not just the fields growing crops, but all the pastures will need to have a Russell II calculation done. Next slide. So you remember, too, that he's got this animal walkway here that is basically just bare dirt. And so there are the conservation concern here when you've got just this open area for so long. So there is something NRCS can help with. Next slide. So again, the prescribed grazing, the animal walkways and trails, maybe they could put in some gravel screenings or some shale, whatever that would be working with an NRCS engineer to decide what would be the best option for the farmer. But again, the farmer has to feel comfortable with that option as well. Fencing, helping with that, internal fencing for the prescribed grazing to keep the animals out of the stream or make sure that they're not in there too long a time where they might cause erosion to the stream banks. And again, the farmer needs to have buy-in on whatever type of infrastructure you're talking about, and working with their goals, their future plans is very important when you're discussing what type of practice standards they might want to put in place to meet these conservation concerns. Next slide. Remember the oil leaking from the compressor onto the ground by the milk house, and then of course there's this hog bedding outside the barn, and the manure being spread year-round, the calves being housed so close to the river, and they're obviously being fresh manure. And of course, when they move those hutches, then there's no hutch in place to protect it when you have a heavy rain, and boom, it's right down there into the river. So there's a whole variety of both surface water and groundwater concerns, especially since there's so close proximity to the river, as well as the fact that the soil is very sandy and the water table is very high. Next slide. As well, we have this irrigation pond, which has a lot of issues. Mike really does want to see this get cleaned up, and so he is looking to you as the technical service provider to make suggestions, but again, it's a discussion back and forth between you with having a variety of options and the farmer with what they want to do. Next slide. Next slide. So what you're going to discuss with the farmer, you can go to the next slide. Maybe we're having a little sticky key here. Is you will be discussing obviously nutrient management. Any time that there's manure spread on farm fields, you're going to want to talk about nutrient management. What time? When are they spreading it? If they are spreading it in the winter, you wouldn't want it anywhere near where it could run into a surface water. Perhaps even having some type of manure storage facility, compost facility on the farm would be something to discuss with the farmer. But there is a roof runoff structure, practice standard 558. That would be specifically for that leaking oil pipe by the milk house. Nutrient management would really help the farmer really see his manure handling from the calf hutches to the sacrificial pastures to that pond to his winter spreading. All those things would be part of a comprehensive nutrient management plan. Now, you can discuss some of those items in your plan, but unless you are approved for writing nutrient management plans, you would not be doing a complete 590 for them. Another thing, too, would be the fencing as far as keeping the livestock out of the pond. And again, be careful to discuss these issues with the farmer in a non-judgmental way. They are actually bringing you onto the farm because they are looking for an outside person who will help them see how they can improve their farm and what they need to do to achieve organic certification. So you're there to be a helper and really work with the farmer on improving their situation. Next slide. So, did we miss anything? Well, that's not that hard. This probably is a little bit exhausting. Like I said, we've now spent 4 hours walking over the farm. There were a lot of things to discuss and look at, both conservation concerns and organic certification requirements. And there may be something that you, maybe in your wrap-up, you might have missed. So I'm just asking you to think about it if there was something you missed. And also, you're probably going to make more than one visit. Next slide. Remember to discuss those organic regulations. They really are looking for you to give them guidance on that. So again, all ages of ruminant livestock beyond the age of 6 months need to meet the pasture standard of dry matter, 30% dry matter intake for pasture. All types of livestock need to have access to the outdoors. Even though hogs are not ruminants, they still need to be outside. They don't necessarily have to have that high of amount of their feed intake from grazing, but they still need to go outside. The organic farmer needs to protect their crops from drift, including all pastures, and that's the kind of secondary fence that he had. From what he said, from all the wind, may not even be large enough because there is no specific size for a buffer zone. It just needs to be large enough to prevent the unintended application of a prohibited substance. And especially if that potato field is aerially sprayed, it could be an issue that he may need to have a 60 or 80-foot buffer for his organic certification. But like I said earlier, organic farmers must protect the natural resources of their operation, including the groundwater, surface waters, wildlife protection, all those things. And so there were quite a few issues on this farm, and I don't think you should be surprised as a TSP to see a wide variety of issues on just about every farm that you go to. Next slide. And we did forget something. We forgot about the Sandpoint shallow well, and that is not properly abandoned. And so this would be another NRCS practice standard, the water well decommissioning number 351, which can be used. Again, this is a shallow well. This is near the barn where the manure from the hogs is piled, where the calves periodically can be housed. So there's issues here, and of course any sort of well that is no longer being used should be properly abandoned because this goes right down to the groundwater. So it's really important that you as a TSP are walking around with a clipboard, that you're taking good notes, make notes on the map, make notes on your CPA 52, that field inventory, look at your pasture conditions score sheet, and then you probably will need to think things through and call the farmer afterwards, because it's not going to be easy to just have all these answers to the conservation concerns at your fingertips. Next slide. So what you would submit to the NRCS and to the operator, so remember this is not just for the NRCS to see, but the operator is going to be using this as a plan for their future activities. You would complete the template for the transition to organic for cropland and for grazing, because this is a grazing farm. You'll have to give in a topographical map for all the fields and pastures, and that can be all found online. You will need the soil maps for all the fields and pastures by field, and that you can get on Web Soil Survey. You'll be doing a soil loss evaluation printout for all the fields and pastures through Russell 2. You'll be submitting all the practice standards and job sheets for everything that you and the farmer have agreed to be in the plan, and any other supporting documentation that you might have, like soil tests or perhaps even a water test on that pond water, so then since they are using it for irrigation, you know, what actually are they putting on that land? And through that, so you're kind of starting a nutrient management plan, just giving them the tools to see where some of their issues are. If you don't have familiarity with Russell 2, you can hire someone else to do those soil loss evaluations through Russell 2, but you'll be working quite closely with them to make sure that they are running all the various alternatives, especially in management, and offering those alternatives to the farmer. So it's probably a good idea for you to learn Russell 2 if you can, and personally here in Wisconsin, we have had a lot of help from NRCS staff to learn Russell 2, and it can be a very deep and valuable resource, although I have to say when you first are approaching it, it can be a little daunting. But I know all of you out there are really smart and shouldn't let that stop you from moving ahead with Russell 2. Next slide. And there we are. So I imagine there are some questions.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder, Lindsay, you can say hello as soon as you get back on. Lindsay is going to join us from Washington. Lindsay, are you there? I know
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Lindsay. Okay, Lindsay's there too. I'm going to start with some specific questions, maybe I kind of already. So you get to the end. Basically, the question is the oil leak, near the river, and you're suggesting this is obviously a concern, a resource concern, but the farmer thinks it's no big deal. He doesn't want it in the plan. As a TSP, are you kind of obligated to put these in there, or is it just you decide what the things are that you want to put in the plan? I guess that if there's a disagreement between what's a big deal or not a big deal, or what the farmer wants to do versus the TSP sees.
Well, I don't think you can force the farmer to do anything, but the job as TSP would be to offer them various alternatives, perhaps putting in maybe kind of a concrete holding area under that drip, maybe look at why is the compressor dripping so much oil. I think pointing out the issues, like, look, all this water runs off this roof, driving that oil down into your groundwater, which is where you get the well for watering your animals and your family. So I think if you can give the farmer the information that you have and you know that this is an issue, most of the time you can convince them that this is something significant that they should look at fixing.
Go ahead. Is there anything, Lindsay, did you want to add, or not really?
I'm glad that came up, because I think that was an important resource concern, that NRCS doesn't necessarily have a standard to mitigate a contamination of a soil. And while the roof runoff structure will definitely prevent rainwater from washing down and percolating that oil or whatever the fuel is into the soil, it's not really completely addressing the problem. And while the CAT asked you to look at water quality issues, you're right that it is just a plan, and we're offering alternatives. And we don't have a practice necessarily to fix that, but we certainly have information and resources to share with folks. And I think even if it's outside NRCS or your circle of knowledge, there are places to look to, state agencies, other folks, to give people some pointers on how they could address that.
Thanks. Can a person sign up to become a TSP, and then in effect write their own CAP 138?
Well, I think that would be up to the NRCS to decide if someone can receive payment from the NRCS. I actually think probably not, because the whole point of the TSP is to bring in an outside person to review your operation. Just like you, as if you wanted to be organically certified, you could not be the inspector for your own farm. There's a value to having an outside person come and see your operation with fresh eyes, and hopefully bringing in some technical knowledge that maybe you would not consider as important, but somebody else might see as an issue. So I would say probably not. Now, you can write a CAP 138 plan on your own farm and submit it to the NRCS as your sample plan to get approved as a TSP, but you would not receive any payment for writing that plan. But you can do it on your own farm if you want to submit a sample plan, because that's part of being approved as a TSP, is that you have to submit a sample plan where you illustrate that you know all the various parts that have to go in it and you are capable of completing it. But you wouldn't be able to receive payment for writing your own plan. I believe that's correct, right, Lindsay?
Yes, I would agree with that. And Harriet, I wouldn't say for sure that our regulations doesn't strictly prohibit that, but I don't think the intent was to allow that situation. And I think your example of using your own farm as your practice farm to submit is an excellent suggestion.
There's a couple questions that are somewhat related here, but obviously there's quite a few things to do that you've worked out through going on this tour with the farm. They're obviously going to cost quite a bit of money. I know this is a planning tool, but obviously this is often associated with the EQUIP program and cost share and ability to get some resources from NRCS. I think the question is here that, it's difficult enough to become transition organic. Now this seems like I have to do a lot of extra things. That's a lot of resources. And I guess one way to think of this is what is the share in general of cost share and things for doing some of these activities, and yeah, anyway, you can get the gist of the question. Is it extra lot of work? It does have obvious benefits for organic transition, but it is costly. So how does that work out? I guess more talk about how do we get this work done, and the costs and associated costs for doing so.
Well, most of the practice standards, the payment schedules are based on what's considered kind of an average cost for that region. I believe right now they're, like here in Wisconsin, it's a kind of a mix of Minnesota and I believe Iowa and Michigan and Wisconsin. And it's supposed to cover about 75% of the cost. And that would include the labor of the person doing it. So if it's cover crop, that would include not just the cost of the seed, but also the cost of doing the tillage, the planting, that sort of thing. So typically, yes, the farmer does need to kind of chip in some more money, but they also have to do the work. And that's a lot where the commitment to meeting the items in the plan are. But if they want to be certified organic, planting a shelter belt alongside that conventional potato field, meaning that they would need a smaller buffer zone. So in the end, it benefits them. In addition, they could have their paddocks there. It would be an area in the heat of summer where the animals could go for shade. So it offers a whole variety of benefits that, yes, it does take a commitment to do it, and there will be a little bit of monetary input from the farmer. But most of it will be more them making it part of their system. So, yes, there will be costs, but in the end, typically, as we know, when you are involved in conservation, a lot of the cost is up front, and then the benefits hopefully last a long time. And the other thing too is the plan can go out 5 years, so they wouldn't have to do everything all at once.
Lindsay, any comment, or I'll ask the next question?
I thought that was really well answered, but I would just add the voluntary nature of these conservation programs and the voluntary nature of a farmer choosing to become organic. You make those commitments, as Harriet mentioned, and NRCS has attempted to help offset some of those financial investments, because as she mentioned, that they are long-term investments and you will reap the benefits over a long period of time.
There's been quite a bit of questions related to Russell II as a barrier. There are some people suggesting that the local conservation district can help with that. You mentioned soil sample information. There's a question like, does the TSP need to take a soil sample? Is that part of their job? Anyway, I think there is quite a bit of issue that people are seeing the Russell II as, yeah, I know you mentioned this already, Harriet, but the Russell II being kind of a barrier, I guess, to doing some of this planning work. I guess it's more of a comment than necessarily a question.
Well, like I said, I mean, I have been learning Russell II. I'm definitely not, someone who's highly knowledgeable. I don't feel ready to teach a webinar on Russell II, I can tell you that. But the more that I work with Russell II, the more I see how really a tremendous amount of information in it that can really be a useful tool in helping the farmer make decisions. I mean, they can see what the crop yield potentials are of their soil type. I mean, this is going to help with their crop rotation plans, with the types of crops that they grow, where they grow them, how long their rotations are. I mean, these are all things that you can offer to farmers that are science-based and really useful. So the pain that you have to go through to learn Russell II, in the end, is worth it. And especially since you absolutely have to submit those Russell II soil loss calculation printouts to the NRCS with the plan. So I guess I would say I know that in Wisconsin they're offering an online training program on Russell II right now. I just encourage people around the country to talk to their TSP coordinators in their state and tell them, look, I really I need some help with Russell II. Can you put together a training program, either online or in person, or a mix of the two? Is there someone in the state that's willing to tutor me, be willing to answer questions that I can call from home? All those things, reach out and make it happen. I actually recently, my husband is learning to be a TSP, and we spent some time learning Russell II. I taught him what I felt I could teach him, and then he went to the regional agronomist here and spent about 3 hours, and really that was what he needed. Now we also have that person as a backup, so if we have a question, we don't feel like we're just kind of standing out there lost. We can go and get some help. So I would just recommend that people do that type of outreach locally and see if they can find someone to help them.
And I would echo that. If folks want help and feel that's a barrier, we want to help eliminate that barrier. So let your local field offices know that you're looking for help. If they're not able to help you at that moment, ask them for training, as Harriet suggested. And there is that online course through Wisconsin that is a current resource. One last thing I'd offer is, it's not really clear from the template, and we need to probably make it clear, is that what we're turning to for our planners is having screening thresholds for whether you need to address soil erosion and all the other resource concerns. And right now we have it at, if you have more than 90% ground cover and you're less than 10% slope, you don't need to run Russell II. So obviously in a crop situation, you're going to have less than 90% cover, but in a pasture situation, you may very well have over 90% cover and be less than 10% slope, and you wouldn't need to run Russell II.
That kind of asks an interesting question, Lindsay, that somebody said, so how do you measure slope as a TSP?
That's a great question, and there's instruments, different instruments available. A relatively cheap instrument is called a clinometer that you can get through Forestry Supply or Gempler's or any number of folks. It's just a small handheld device that you, once you get someone to sort of orient you, or I think the instructions are pretty good, by standing on the slope and looking over the horizon, you look at an internal scale inside the clinometer and it will tell you the slope of the land. You also need a document. Go ahead.
The Web Soil Survey also gives you kind of a range.
Yes, every soil map unit has a range of percent slope, but I would still encourage folks to measure the slope because usually the ranges are within 5%, and that can make a really huge difference on what the erosion would be. And a clinometer, I think it costs about $80, and it's relatively easy to learn how to use, and I think the local field offices could help you with that also. And you also have to measure the slope length, which again, the maps can help you some, especially the topography maps. It's just a useful, easy skill to learn that really helps make the accuracy of your erosion predictions that much better.
And I could see we actually did measure the slope on this farm, but I didn't take any pictures.
Yeah. There's a little bit with Russell too, again, just because follow up with that, and it just came in recent. Does Russell 2 have the capability of dealing with vegetable farms? I guess there's an issue here. I guess we've been talking mostly field crops here and dairy, obviously, and grazing, but what about vegetable production in general? Is that capable of dealing with that issue?
The answer is yes. There is, they have mulching in there. All the various tools that you would use for management, tillage, and planting, all of those things are in Russell 2. They are there. It maybe would be a little bit more work because in a vegetable rotation you might be doing succession planting, and so your management might be more complicated, but you should be able to do something for a vegetable farm, whatever it is, because those things are actually in Russell 2.
And I would add that you guys did a previous webinar that was excellent with Giulio Ferruzzi, our agronomist, that explained how to use Russell 2 on more complex vegetable operations.
All of this is kind of a general question, but all of this seems like a lot of work. You were mentioning many times, Harriet, many visits. One person asked, like, well, once I've done the plan and signed off and got my payment even, do I have any obligations past that with the farmer? I think it's actually getting more like pragmatic here. Is this, can the payment that you get for doing this work can compensate you at, I mean, can we make a business of this? Can it actually be support the kind of quite a high level of work that seems to be needed to go into this?
Well, I guess I'm coming at it as someone who has been an organic inspector, where you spend 3 to 4 hours on the farm. You have to then go back and write a report. True, you don't have to run Russell 2, but those farm inspections could be $300. Now, that is just a one-time visit, but these plans, I believe the payment is $1,800 at this time, and I think there's even a little bit extra if there's more driving over a certain distance. I don't have all those specific dollars in that, but I think that once you knew what you were doing and you wanted, and you had the checklist. The first 2-3 plans are going to take longer, but once you are familiar with what work you need to do, probably you would end up going to the farm, do a 3 or 4 hour walkover, maybe go home, spend a day getting the maps together, running the Russell 2, getting that all done, and then talk to the farmer perhaps on which management alternatives they want to do. Go back to the farm with the finished plan that you've already talked it over with the farmer on the phone. They sign off on it. That's probably maybe only an hour, hour and a half, and then you're done. And no, you have no obligation to continue talking to the farmer once they've signed off on the plan.
Here's kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure where it's going, but this is doesn't the CAP 138 duplicate what the NRCS District Conservation will be doing with the farmer anyway? So why necessarily do a CAP 138? Again, given the difficulties of transitions and already, I think this may be getting to the question that you mentioned earlier in the webinar about, a big full-blown conservation plan, which apparently NRCS can provide, and doing a cap, and why would one choose one over the other, I guess?
Well, the NRCS person is most likely not going to understand all the details of organic certification. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. So this TSP is bringing kind of a melding of conservation and organic requirements together. So that's one thing that the NRCS person probably won't have, is all that minutia. Like, they may see the wind coming from the neighbor's potato field as not being an issue for the pasture person. They may see the potato person, they have an issue if their soil is going off in the wind, but for the organic person, it's an issue because of the drift. But as far as with the district conservationist, well, it depends. How many times has that district conservationist been to that farm? Would they really be spending the 3 and 4 hours, or would they only come out when the farmer says, I want to put in a stream crossing, and then they just look at the stream crossing? So typically the district conservationist, at least in my experience, has been that they are not going to do a full farm walkover every time they come out to your farm. They're not going to go into the same depth that this TSP is going to do, because they're going to look at everything that's there.
And I would just say it's all about building capacity. NRCS needs to build capacity in their technical knowledge of organic and sustainable systems, and we need more private folks like yourselves to become TSPs so you can help deliver this kind of assistance. To me, it seems like we now have this bottleneck of we have this financial assistance available and this plan opportunity for folks, and we need more TSPs out there with the technical knowledge of organics to mesh with the NRCS conservation objectives so that we can get more service to more people.
Okay, this is one quick one for thing, and I think we'll make this the last. Somebody mentioned that you could certify the cattle for the grazing milking operation and not necessarily those hogs for the 4-H fair. Is that true? I mean, I know there's this issue, there is split operations, and I suppose that might add complexity to CAP 138 planning or not. Anyway, that was the question.
Yeah, so yes, that's true. They could have those hogs on the farm, never let them outside, but they could not be organic. But Mike asked if he could sell them as organic. It would not affect his organic certification for his dairy, as long as the dairy animals, every animal over 6 months of age that's a ruminant, that's being certified for their product, is meeting the grazing rule. But no, they could have non-organic hogs on the farm, no problem. But there still was an issue with, the piling of the manure and that sort of thing.
Correct.
But they wouldn't, that would be the conservation side. But no, they would not have to have those hogs certified in order to have the dairy certified. And that happens a lot. Many times people only have their cropland certified and not their livestock. Or they may have conventional cropland and be doing poultry that have outside access, and that's organic. So, and actually there's many times where someone has 3 of their 10 fields that are certified and all the rest are not. So split operations are allowed under the NOP.
Correct. Well, Lindsay or Harriet, you could make any last comments. Again, I want to encourage people there'll be an immediate survey coming up right after this, and I appreciate filling that out. It doesn't take very long. We have one more in this series coming up in March, late March, March 28th. A little bit interesting, having to do with wildlife and some biodiversity issues in organic and in conservation. So it should be exciting, and I hope you'll come back for that. Again, these will We hope to have all of these packaged together kind of in a general playlist that will be able, certainly they're all going to be available on the ATRA site. We hope they will be linked ultimately to the NRCS site, so you can go back and do these. And again,
I
feel
do
free
have
to
one more comment.
Oh,
And
go
that
ahead.
is
Okay, go ahead, Harriet.
that being a TSP can be a very rewarding occupation. You get to spend time out in the field. You're challenged by looking lots of different situations, doing problem solving with the farmers who really know their land and know their environment, and they know what their challenges are. And so you can be very helpful to people if you like being helpful to people, and you like, being challenged and trying to do some problem solving. This is a really fun and interesting job.
And I would
Thanks,
add
Harriet.
that I just want to reiterate the need for TSPs. There's a great demand out there. I think it does make a good business plan. There are other also caps that you don't, if you want to branch out and do a cap for grazing or a cap for nutrient management, and there's certain different requirements for those, but you can make a business out of doing multiple caps and multiple practice implementations. I want to thank Harriet for doing such an excellent job on giving us that virtual tour of a complex process and bringing it down to the farm level virtually. I thought that was really well done. One last resource I might offer up is Harriet showed a number of practices that could meet some example resource concerns. There's actually a more comprehensive matrix on the NRCS website under the Organic Initiative that outlays the link between NOP regulations, the resource concerns, and all of the many different conservation practices that can address those concerns. So good job, and thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was meaning to get back to all those comments. I just wanted to make sure I also got folks to, again, do the survey and join us for the next one coming up. And feel free to contact us through ATRA. You have Harriet's email there, and we'll get all the questions answered and move forward. And again, thanks everyone. Have a good afternoon.